Hello, everyone. I know I'm a couple days late for doing my videos, but just been so much going on. The news cycle is almost too busy, isn't it? I think we're all kind of getting overwhelmed with all the things. But let's sit and try to focus our discussion today on supply. Um, there's been some interesting publications that have come out lately, and there's been some announcements, and I think that we can kind of tie them all together and discuss what it really means for LNG supply. The Shell LNG Outlook that came out a few days ago is quite interesting. It does talk about the decline in legacy suppliers of LNG. These are the Algeria, Malaysia, Indonesia, stuff that we've been talking about for a while. These countries have either depleting reserves or the reserves are now being sent to their domestic markets. So they're effectively taken out of the international trade. But Shell still talks about pretty much a very dramatic growth in LNG supply for the next few years. So really, my question is, where is this LNG supply going to come from? They do have a graph that talks about that the largest growth in gas is going to be not domestic gas, it's not pipeline gas, it's actually LNG. And that begs to the question of where is this LNG going to come from? We know about the projects in the Middle East, the Qataris and the Abu Dhabi projects. I think those are pretty much underway. They'll happen on time. These things tend to get delivered quite accurately. But what happens next? I don't think there's outside the United States, and I've said this many times, outside the United States, I just don't see a lot of big projects that are going to move the needle. We saw the announcement about Mozambique. For the last 6 months, Total has been saying, yep, they're going to restart those projects. Now I think they've admitted that it's not going to happen, and they've actually told all the contractors to go back, to return, because the security situation is actually getting worse. That not only has an impact for the big Mozambique LNG project, but also has an impact on the Exxon project that's next door, the other onshore project. Suddenly makes E&I look pretty damn smart for going offshore in the FLNG route with Coral, and now the second phase of Coral, and staying away from the onshore political issues in Mozambique. But really, it's a question of not only Mozambique, but any other parts of the world. We are seeing so many parts of the world where there's just not a lot of reserves. There's a growing domestic LNG or gas demand. There is civil unrest. There's financing issues, political issues. I read the Papua New Guinea LNG project is not making much progress at all. Australian LNG projects, if they get going at all, they'll be just basically just to supply the depleting of the legacy projects. We see the Northwest Shelf is now reducing trains all the time. Malaysia, we already mentioned, is going to be a legacy producer that's going to import more and more LNG. People are talking about Argentina being a big exporter. I just don't know how. I just don't see it. Yes, the Vaca Muerte may be great, but we've been talking about it for decades and decades. And now Argentina also needs to import LNG too because of the seasonality of everything and the lack of hydro. Very few countries, I think, can pull off being an LNG exporter and an LNG importer at the same time. And especially if you're trying to be a seasonal exporter like Argentina is, that's just very, very difficult because the seasons change. How can you promise a delivery to somebody, an LNG export delivery, when you're still importing LNG and in the open market? So I think there's a political issue of that as well. And Argentina, unfortunately, even though I love Argentina, it's a country of failed dreams, and it's just not clear to me that things are really that different right now. So, and Canada, I know that the Canadian U.S. trade tension is there, and there's been a revision in the Canadian press about, hey, we should be getting back on the LNG wagon that we got off and we shouldn't have got off. I'm totally impressed with the way LNG Canada seems to be delivering, but really after that, and maybe Cedar LNG, are there any big projects that are going to really move the needle? We're talking about projects that are 5, 10, 20 million tons. They just are not that many projects around the world. And if you look at the Shell forecast, they're talking about in 5 to 10 years going from 400 to 650 to 700 million tons. So we're going to have this big gap between where we perceive where we need LNG supply to supply this growing demand in all markets around the world, and where is that supply actually going to come from? We know about the supply in the Middle East, like I talk about, and we know about the US supply. So the US supply, let's talk about that. There's projects that are going to be an expansion. We talk about the venture globals of the world that keep on talking bigger and bigger numbers, and that's good for the world, I guess. But there's only a limit of how much expansions there can be. These expansions are a finite number. It remains to see what that ceiling is. But we're going to see more coming out of Cheniere, both Sabine and Corpus, and we're going to see more coming out of Venture Global Plaquemines. After that, maybe CP2, then CP2 will happen. After that, it gets all a bit iffy. I think that the Mexico-U.S. relationship has got worse and worse. The relocation of Mexico Pacific to Mexico, to me, is not a good sign for the project. I don't know enough about what that really means, but I don't think it's a good sign. But the U.S.-Mexican relationship is getting more fraught. The new tariffs were just imposed today, and what does that mean for the projects in Mexico that are hoping to use American LNG? Are they going to be given the carte blanche by the DOE to export? Or are they going to, is there going to be a tariff, a retaliatory tariff in Mexico? And that'll actually reduce the competitiveness of these projects. I think that Mexico has its own political risk issues right now. The cartels and the security situation where Mexico Pacific is, I've been told, is not very good at all. They have a hard time getting people out there. So, I don't think we can count on Mexico to do this massive amount that we talked about. Canada, I think, just is in a political mess. I don't want to sound negative, but we've been hearing about Canadian East Coast Canadian LNG for a long time. Is it finally going to happen? I'll believe it when I see it, I guess. Um, and so I thought it was interesting the news that the Europeans a few weeks ago, I think now, said that they're going to allow and encourage investment in US LNG. I think they've looked around the world and realized there's no other place to be, and you might as well invest in American LNG and keep those American relationships as good as can be. As we know, the American political situation right now is interesting, and I think promises of investment in the U.S. are always looked favorably by the administration. So I think the smart money is on people investing in the U.S. Not only because politically is the wise thing to do, because there's really not many other options around the world for gas to come in. So I think that American LNG is still going to be a major seller of gas in the world. It's going to grow. I think projects like Gulfstream LNG are going to be one of the few projects that are still new and still available for investment. But there are going to be some expansions in the US, and I think that's going to be good for the world if we want to have this industry grow. The more American LNG there is, the lower the cost tends to be. More affordable LNG will be for around the world because American LNG is pretty much a fixed cost based on the local domestic hub price, Henry Hub, plus a transportation, plus a liquefaction, plus a shipping. So it really doesn't change with market dynamics that much, and that's a good thing. Of course, if these countries, smaller markets, are buying it off the trading companies, the trading company is going to keep those margins. But in theory, American LNG FOB should be relatively immune prices to the world LNG dynamics, which is great because that'll allow more LNG to be produced and sold around the world. A lot of people have asked me, what do you think is going to happen if the war in the Ukraine war ends? It will end. All wars end at some point. Are the Europeans going to put all the eggs back in the Russian basket? Maybe they'll be desperate enough to do that. They've seen their economy suffer. They've seen the lack of gas, and American LNG may be too political for them. But at the same time, I think the Europeans are going to be hard pressed to be as dependent to Russian gas as they once were. And I think that it keeps an opening. There's going to be a lot more American LNG and LNG in general coming into Europe. So, in a nutshell, I don't see a lot of projects around the world outside America. I think Russian gas will come back at some point, but it will not come back to the level it does. So, the best bet is still American LNG to really continue that big growth that everybody is expecting, including the Shells of the world that came up with the report. So, we're going to get, what is it, 70 million tons out of Qatar, another 10, 20 million out of the UAE, and that's it. So 100 million tons out of that new expansion is going to be the Middle East. Everything above that 100 million tons has to really come from the US. It's not coming from Mozambique. It's not really going to come from Canada. It's not going to come from Mexico. It's not coming from Southeast Asia. It's not coming from Africa. It's not coming from Australia. There were African projects. There's a few good, interesting ones happening, but these are all relatively small. 2, 3, 4 million tons. If you want to really go from that, 400 million ton level to the 600 or 700 million ton level, you need the big players. 100 million of that comes from the Middle East. Where's the remaining couple hundred million going to come from? It's going to come from the US. Hope this is interesting. Comments always welcome. And let's hope the next few weeks are less intense than the last few weeks have been. And let's keep politics out of LNG and gas if we can. I guess that's wishful thinking. That's probably not going to happen. But as much as possible, let's keep politics out of these things and let's keep it on a purely commercial level. Let's make the best projects win. Thanks.